rise up in the morning beneath the stars so bright. Pull your hat down, make sure your cinch is tight. Horses kinda snuffy, cold chill up your spine. You'll get your ass moving, son, we're burning daylight.
Howdy there, I'm Matt McKinley and we're burning daylight.
In the saddle till the job's done right.
Welcome to Burning Daylight, the only podcast for the working cowboy. Well, howdy there, daylight burners. Thanks again for tuning in. We got a good show for us today. You may have seen some of his posts around, particularly Facebook. I've seen it here lately. For a book called The Lost Cowboy. Mr. JB, Jake is your name? You go by JB or is
go by Jake, but JB's on the book.
Okay. Pen name, is that kind of?
Yeah, that's right. It's the pen name. I thought it might give me a little separation from my private life to my social life.
Okay. Nice. Anyway, called Lost Cowboy, and you have essentially cowboyed on 6 out of the 7 continents on Earth. And how old a guy are you? You're still fairly young, I'd say.
Yeah, I'm 29.
Okay, so you've been a long ways in your short time. That's intriguing. I've read a lot about a lot of parts of the world, but I haven't been very many places outside the good old US of A. And there's times where I kind of kick myself for not traveling a little bit more when I was younger. But anyway, we'll get into all that. I guess let's get to your book right off the bat. You released it here just like not too long ago, right?
Yeah, it came out in the beginning of March. Did a couple little release, well, not little, but some release deals down in Texas. One in Fort Worth, one in Austin, and yeah, it came out in March. So it's been 2 months, a little over 2 months at this time. It went to the bestseller spot in its category or whatever you call it. So it had the bestseller badge and went better than I ever could have imagined.
That's that's awesome. How I was listening to you on Tuffy's show on You Can't See Him from the Road the other day, and you were saying you kind of just like recorded your thoughts and then transcribed it a lot for a lot of it. And like how early on into your travels did you start doing that?
It was kind of towards the end that I started doing that. What I did was originally I was night cabbing for my grandpa, and I was sitting in this little cold barn next to a space heater, and you've got a lot of time in between checks when you're going out there to cows, and so I'd have these hour increments of nothing to do but sit in that barn. So what I started doing was just using the audio recorder on my laptop and just talking to my laptop and having it record it. And then I'd done quite a few of them, but it was just kind of me randomly talking to the computer, telling each story. And as I went along, I started to get lost myself, where I was in the story and stuff like that. So I went back and made kind of a timeline, or like an idea of the order of which stories I'd like to tell and in what order they happened. So I started doing it that way. And then I had this thought that, I could do this and then turn the audio over to somebody, or if I happen to die doing some of the crazy stuff that I've done, then at least it's documented, and that's why I started doing it. But the more I thought about it, I was thinking, you know, uh, if this book comes out and it's somebody else writes it, if I hire a ghostwriter or somebody, you know, else to write it, if that happens and the book comes out and I don't like it or the public doesn't like it or something like that, uh, I'll have nobody to blame but myself because I'm fully capable
Yeah.
of writing it, and I'm just taking the easy way out by doing the audio thing. So that I don't know when that transition happened in my mind. It was somewhere during night calving, and I got to thinking, I ought to just might as well type these down while I'm sitting here on my laptop.
Hmm.
It's probably more useful than me just talking.
That's I mean, it's it can be kind of a bore when you're talking to yourself. Like when I always like every time I record a solo podcast, I always think, man, I that sucked so bad. And then then I get comments on it, or people compliment me on it. And I'm like, well, that's I guess somebody enjoyed it. But I always just feel like that sounds on. There is something about writing it. I don't know. It just there's there's I mean it's the reason books are always more memorable than movies. Like when
Well,
people always say like the book's better than the movie, and
now that you say that, I remember exactly what caused me to start writing it. And I hadn't thought about this in a while, but I watched a video somewhere on the interwebs where it was like this old kind of he was like an Indian medicine man or something like that, and he was talking about how if you had a tough experience that you've had in your life, that it will help you to write down that experience. And I think this is also like a way that people uh, kind of use therapy to help with PTSD. You write down the
hmm
experience the exact way that you saw it and felt it and everything, and you write it down and you crumple up that piece of paper and you light it on fire, and then you generally feel better after writing that down. And if you still have kind of issues around it and you want to work on it some more, write it down again. And you continue to write
hmm
that, put what you're feeling into paper. And even if what you're writing is not any good, putting it down somewhere can be helpful as like therapeutic
hmm
to some people. So after seeing that video, I wondered like maybe I should write some of this and just see what happens. And I am dyslexic, so handwriting stuff is really hard for me. Um,
Oh, I
not,
bet.
it's not hard, but it's slow, it's tedious. So typing is kind of the same thing. So I wasn't like burning these pieces of paper, but a lot of it started out right there, just typing it down, typing out these experiences that I went through, and it was
Hmm.
somewhat therapeutic. I don't know that I needed therapy. That's not why I started it, but just the idea of it possibly being
Mm,
therapeutic is why I started to write it down.
yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, yeah, it's not that you were searching out therapy, but like yeah, there's certain things that are just therapeutic. Yeah, I gotcha. Um, so where are you from originally? You're Wyoming, is that right?
Yeah, Wyoming's home to me, South Central Wyoming.
Okay. And how like how old were you when you started off on this journey? Was it was it your initial journey like I'm gonna go cowboy everywhere I can, or was it just like hey that sounds cool over there I'm gonna go try that for a minute?
Uh, well, I started this when I was 21. Australia was the first
Okay.
place that I went to, and when I went to Australia, the idea of cowboying all over the world had never crossed my mind. It was just the thought that that I'd like to go see something new. I'd been riding bulls for a long time at that point, and shortly before that, I hung up my bull rope, and my injuries got the best of me, and mentally, I just wasn't there to be doing that anymore, and so I stopped doing it, and it left kind of a void in my life. So the traveling just kind of picked up. I didn't know it would do that. That wasn't the purpose of me doing it, but I was just looking for something exciting to do. So I went to Australia when I was 21. The kind of traveling journey concluded when I set a goal. Later on in the journey, I set a goal to have it done by 25. So
Okay.
by the time I was 25 years old, I had cowboyed on 6 continents. So that's kind of where it started and ended. And then it took me 4 or 5 years to get the book done and out there. But the last place I went to was Mongolia, and I was 25 when I was there.
That's the one I'm most intrigued about reading, and so I I want to talk a little bit about your journeys, but without going too far into it, make people read the damn book. It sound so but all right, so Australia, I would assume there's a lot of stuff that's pretty similar to working ranch out here, and then a whole bunch of shit that just completely seem bad, just ass backward compared to what we do.
Yeah, it was so Australia was the horsemanship was very very similar. They ride in a different saddle, but otherwise, well, and their saddles don't have horns, so roping and tying off to your horn down there is just that's not a thing that they do. So I suppose that was the biggest difference. But when I was down there, the majority of what we were doing was we were contracted by the Australian government, the company I worked for, to go out and catch feral cattle, wild bulls,
Mm-hmm.
and they were all over the place. And I get the question a lot all the time when why didn't you use horses to catch the bulls? And you certainly could have. There back in the day in Australia before they had dirt bikes and four wheelers and all this other stuff. They used horses, but uh, you'll blow out a horse pretty quick because it's big country. I mean, we were in charge of uh, they call it mustering, but just gathering more or less 6 million acres roughly while I was down there. So it's
Yep.
just a lot of country to cover, and so you could get a couple bulls a day probably roped horseback, but it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
uncommon for us to go out and catch 20 bulls in a day. But a lot of that was you're on a dirt bike going 40 miles an hour across a flat, and that would just
Yeah.
gas out a horse. So that was a little bit different. They used a lot of motorized stuff down there. Still, we were horseback quite a bit, but yeah, it was just we were tripping down bulls, so we'd grab them by their tail and
Mm-hmm.
pull them down on the ground and then tie them up. And we had a big 6-wheel drive army truck with a door that opened on the side. And when we got a bull caught, they'd drive up next to it, and we'd hook a winch up to its horns, and they'd pull it up the side, up like a what do you call a ramp, and put them up in
Okay.
the trailer. And that was a lot easier than having 10 guys horseback and having to go switch out horses constantly to get that done.
Yeah. Yeah, I would imagine so. Do they use helicopters and stuff a lot over there
They
too?
do. They do. So our like on a so part of what we did was catching wild bulls, and that was the exciting part, the part that everybody enjoyed. But the other part of that was there was still plenty of cows and calves that were out there unbranded, just running around wild.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of that was done. They called it coaching down there. They'd coach the cattle, and so I'd be horseback, and probably 5 or 6 other people would be horseback. Um, and we would start at the far corner of the pasture at daylight, and then we'd take off with a bunch of, whatever we could find, 10, 20 cows, something like that, and start driving them the shortest and easiest path back to the corrals that we had to work them in the following day. And then we had dirt bikes, four-wheelers, these like bull catcher armored Jeep things, and then we had choppers. So we had all those out there, and the machines, their job was to go out and kind of fan out through that country and bring everything back to the herd that we were driving. So we'd start with 20 at the beginning of the day, and by the end of the day, when we're getting towards the gate, we'd have 2,000 head of feral cattle. But the people horseback, their job was just to kind of keep them together and keep them moving, and the machines would just add to the bunch as they could.
Now, what kind of cattle are they running in those type of situations? Like, is they more like English breeds, or are they still a lot of Brahmin influence?
So the feral cattle that we were gathering were English breeds mostly. They definitely they certainly had some Brahmin influence to them, but they were essentially, those cattle were on a fully functioning cattle station that was running for a long time, but they quit back, I don't know, 50 years ago, something like that, and they just let it revert to wild. So a lot of those cattle were like shorthorn, and kind of that. I never saw Angus down there because it's too hot, but they were kind of English breeds. But then you'd go next door, because we also were contracted to muster the bigger ranches that were next door, and they were run by, very meticulously run, taken care of. Those places were just straight Brahmin, and one place had white Brahmin or gray Brahmin. The other place had red, and that was the way they kept them apart. If they got mixed up, they knew the white and the reds were the difference. So they would get on to the place we were working, the wildest place. So some of those Brahmin bulls got bred in, but a lot of it was just that kind of English, European type cattle on the place we were on.
Now, so is this kind of like what they'd consider the outback, or is it more like, is it close to the coast than that, the outback itself?
It's close. We were really close to the coast. So we were up in a part of Australia called Cape York. And Cape York, down there, they don't call people cowboys, they call them ringers. A cowboy is a ringer. And to say you're a ringer from the top end, and where we were at the very top end of Queensland. So there's songs about ringers from the top end, and it's kind of like a point of pride to say that you're a ringer from the top end. And so we're northern Queensland. By most Australian standards, it's one of the wildest places in Australia, because the outback is pretty wild, but also there's nothing there. And where we were, there was no civilizations or anything like that up there. It was just wild, kind of unsettled places, and it was us, and there's probably 10 to 15 of us working up there. Most of the people that worked with us were Aboriginals. Anybody that lived up there in that area were Aboriginals. And so it was just us and the natives, basically. And it's far from any sort of city, but it's not what you think of when you think of the outback. It wasn't just desert. I mean, these cattle are drinking brackish water because we're that close to the coast.
I see. Okay, so it'd be more like kind of like a South Texas back in the day.
Exactly. It'd be like a Southeast Texas right on the coast. It looks like the Serengeti. It's a lot. There's no big trees, but it's a lot of like thorny brush, and then big open grasslands with termite mounds everywhere.
Oh, okay. Huh. Crazy crazy that some of the different wildlife and you get in other parts of the world where it sounds like. I mean, Australia seems like it's just its own place because everything's trying to kill you. But
Yeah.
it seems like it's closer to an Africa than it is to say here. I guess where like the U.S. is kind of unique in its own regard on the landscape, but um, yeah, there's Australia's a weird one. It's 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 Aboriginals and former prisoners
Yeah,
essentially.
that's exactly right. And the folks that I was working with, I mean, what I was doing down there is not a desirable job for most Australians. So a lot of those guys I worked with down there were, they're ex-convicts or, you know, schizophrenic, I mean,
Mm,
it was kind of the outcasts of society that didn't fit in. And Aboriginals fit into that too, as well, unfortunately. But like it was
mm,
that, that's kind of where they had been driven to off the coast and stuff. Like the white folks kind of drove the, the Aboriginals out of there. And there was still plenty of Aboriginals that lived in the cities and stuff, but uh, there was still a lot of people we worked with. Some of my best friends over there are Aboriginal guys that they don't even have a house. They just kind of wander around, light a fire every night, like just living out of a bedroll. And that was the way that,
go walkabout.
yeah, that was the way that they enjoyed to live, and that's kind of the only place they could do it in Australia. So um,
Hmm.
yeah, it was a pretty rough bunch of folks that I was working with out there.
Yeah, I would bet. Now, are the Aboriginals are they good a horseback, or is it kind of like or are they are the natives here a little different story where like there's like certain tribes that just took to the horse, and I want did they have horses in Australia before the Brits went over?
No, I don't think they did. So there's not like an old, um, it's not like something with Comanches or Apaches or something over here where there was like a long storied history with the horse.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't mean that they weren't good horsemen. There's plenty that were, but it wasn't like integrated into their culture, I think, until fairly recently. But
Oh, okay.
Aboriginal folks over there, they've got it pretty rough. Just the way that they were treated and the way the government worked for a long time and stuff, they had it pretty rough. And those people are fighters. They're tough as tough can be, and um, I mean, some of the nastiest street fights I've ever seen were just fights for fun amongst these
Yeah.
Aboriginal folks that I lived with, and I mean, they would just have knockdown, drag out brawls just for fun. That's what they did, or that was a point of pride for them. So take that to cowboying. They were some of the hardest, toughest dudes that I have ever come across. I mean, just
Huh.
unbreakable. And they didn't mean that they always knew what they were doing with horses, but they dang sure weren't going to be beat by a bronc one day. I mean, they just keep climbing back on and keep climbing back on after they got dumped.
Hmm. That's wild. Um. Yeah, I'd like to go over there sometime and see how they do things. It's what I mean the Australia is about the size of the United States landmass wise. I mean it's a big damn place,
Yeah,
and with a hell of a lot less population. It's kind of it's kind of one of the last like sure enough frontier parts of the world. There's you get out into the outback and some of those other territories, and there just is nothing out there. There's no people. There ain't anything.
that's right. Yeah, it's the center. I think it's something crazy like 80 or 90% of the Australian population lives within I think it's 20 miles of the coast. So the whole center
Oh,
of
no
the
shit.
country is just barren. There's very few people that live out there.
Yeah, my brother-in-law's in the Air Force, and him and his wife, my sister-in-law, they were based out in Alice Springs for a couple of years,
Hmm.
and way out in the middle of the outback, and yeah, they just talked about how freaking far it was to anything, and yeah, it's crazy. So how long were you over there?
I was in Australia for 4 months. It wasn't that long,
Okay.
but I I did it over. I was still finishing up college at that point, so it was over the course of the college summer. So I think that
Mm,
whatever that was, 4 months, somewhere in there.
nice. Where'd you go to school at?
I went to the University of Wyoming. I went there on a
Okay.
on a rodeo scholarship and rode bulls on the rodeo team for a while. Um, well, for most of the time that I was there, and then I quit towards the end of college, so that led into the traveling stuff.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, I went to CSU, so
Oh,
pretty familiar
yeah,
territory.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, I always enjoyed the border war uh tailgate. Like it was a lot of shit talking, but like you guys were our rivals, but we didn't hate you. Like we hated CU,
Right.
and I always enjoyed drinking beer with the Wyoming folks in the parking lot. There was a lot of shit talking, but
Yeah.
like it was all in pretty good fun, you know.
Yeah, there's plenty of shit talking, but I mean, really, we're the two ag schools. If anything, like I mean, we can want to win a football game or something like that, but at the end of the day, we're both schools are doing the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. It was. I always enjoyed the border war. It was. And let's face it, we're both just awful football teams. So there
Yeah,
wasn't a whole lot to really be rooting for. You
yeah.
know, like there it was.
We're just hoping for a
there-
bowl game most of the
yeah, I know
time.
it. Yeah, that's exactly right. And then CSU's got so damn just like way off into to like greeny world nowadays, where it just like I don't even like saying that I went to CSU anymore. They got so they're just
Yeah, that
they went hard in the liberal arts.
yeah, and Colorado in general. I'm actually originally from Colorado, from northern Colorado, and
Yeah.
I grew up. Well, I spent my childhood years in Estes Park, so not too far from there,
Oh, okay.
and
Yeah, I was down in the southeast corner, so
southeast.
is where I grew up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm sure Colorado's, anybody in Colorado kind of sees it, but I left Colorado when I think I was 15 when I left there, and I didn't go back until I was in college. So I was probably 18 or 19 the first time I went back there, and just in that 5 year span, I couldn't believe the growth that had happened and just
Mm-hmm.
how crazy it was. And when you're living there, you don't see it every day, or at least you don't notice the little changes. But leave for 5 years and come back, and holy cow, Colorado has changed a lot.
It's wild. I remember when because I started college in '04, and there was still some stretches between Denver and Fort Collins on the interstate that was still just like open pasture farmland. And there's a little tiny bit left nowadays, but it's just houses and people from essentially Colorado Springs to Cheyenne at this point. You know,
Yeah,
it's just holy shit.
yeah. There's that little stretch between Wellington and Cheyenne that's pasture,
Yeah,
and everything else it's just developed the entire thing.
yeah, it's crazy. And I remember, so I moved up right after high school, like after graduation, and I moved up, and I was working for this contractor he was out of Fort Collins, but he gave me a house to live in because he needed somebody in it to cut down his insurance bill or something. So I got paid nothing, but I got like I lived in Loveland for about a month, and then they moved me out to Wellington, and it was at the time like a brand new subdivision, and there wasn't anything around it. It was just that one subdivision between Fort Collins and Wellington, and now it's just all through there. It's just nothing but people.
Yeah, one of my best childhood friends, his family farms down in Longmont area, and I
Mm.
could be getting this wrong, so don't quote me on any of this. But the way I understood it was his family got bought out by Boulder County, all of their farmland. So it
Mm.
basically went back to them owning the house and the shops and everything like that. But all the farmland, and I don't think they wanted to do it. I think it was kind of an eminent domain type thing where they said you have to do this. So that particular family, they farm thousands of acres, but they only own a very tiny 10 acres, something like that, where their house is. And
Huh.
my understanding of that was when that happened, they said you have the right to farm this as long as it's farmland. But as soon as we want to develop it, we're going to. So they're doing it one little
Mm.
chunk at a time. Every year they lose another piece of farm ground, and
Mm.
they come in and develop it and grow and build these cookie cutter houses on it, and their farm gets slightly smaller every year, and they're out there looking for new land to lease. And they, where they live now used to be a very rural area, and now you look out the front window and there's 500 cookie cutter houses just a mile away, and it's just
Oh
encroaching
yeah.
on all that. So yeah, it's especially for people in agriculture, it's been tough in that area for a while.
I mean, you see it all the way. Even a place like Bennett, which was just nothing but open prairie, is now like kind of a thriving suburban area. I mean, it's crazy that like that was always where we'd turn off when I was coming from home up to Fort Collins. We'd turn off I-70 at Bennett, head up to Prospect Valley, and then over. And there was a mechanic shop, at that little cafe, and a gas station, but it wasn't like a come and go or a Maverick or anything like that. It was like, I don't know, like an old Phillips 66, and they might have had a coin operated pop machine, but that was about it.
Yeah.
And now they got a fucking Starbucks. So
It's kind of funny up where I live in Wyoming now. The gas pumps, it's weird to most people, but the gas pumps, you just roll up to them and flip the lever up and fill up,
mm,
and you don't have to go inside. There's no card thing at all, and the dials still spin. It's got dials, so
oh yeah,
like you just pull up, flip the lever, and fill up, and then they just expect you to go inside and pay. But when those gas
yeah,
stations close down at 7 p.m., they're closed, and there's no more gas stations in town. And so that kind
yeah.
of stuff I love, and I hope it never goes away where I'm living.
Yeah, there's certain parts of the world where, or at least in the United States, where like you better have your business done by about 5:30 or 6, or or you're just gonna have to wait till the next day, or you're gonna have to drive a ways.
That's right. Yeah, that, and then also like thinking that credit cards work everywhere and stuff like that. Like that just doesn't really happen up where I'm at. I mean, a credit card's not going to get you all the way. Some of those places just they still deal in cash, and I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a neat way to do things. I know it like around here, we're pretty lucky where we got a few stores, and they usually stay open till Um, I think the store's open till 7 in the summer, and then there's a Mexican restaurant where you can get you can it's kind of got a little Mexican convenience store on the back side of it, and they're open relatively late, but like once everything's shut down, it's shut down, and it's like, well, it's 45 minutes to the next place. So
Yeah, and that's true on Sundays too. I mean, if you might get
yeah.
nothing done on a Sunday, uh, where
Mm,
I'm at.
well, even in a few of the like the bigger small towns around here, like still Sunday's pretty slow. Like I don't know how many people Gardnerville has, but like you can go to Reno, it's an hour and a half from here, and do anything you want on Sundays, but you get much outside of Reno, and it's Sunday's little hit or miss.
Yeah, I really love northern Nevada. Like you take Reno and Sparks and that whole metro
Mm,
area out of that, and northern Nevada is just it's a beautiful place. Almost nobody lives there. It's just big ranches.
mm-hmm.
It reminds me a lot of Wyoming. Just I haven't spent a lot of time in southern Nevada other than being in Vegas for certain things, but I've never been outside of that. But northern Nevada, I mean, I could see myself living up there because it's just a cool area, and
Yeah,
where you're at, you're far enough south out of Reno and all that that you're not in the middle of it. But you take Reno out of the equation, and northern
oh
Nevada
man,
is just desolate.
yeah, it really is. And my wife grew up in Reno, and she's 40, and growing up, Reno was like, I don't know, 50,000 people maybe. Like, not, it wasn't all that big. It was real spread out, and and yeah, it just, with like Tesla and Amazon and all the shit that moved in there. It's one of the fastest growing cities in the country, and I've known my wife. We started dating in 2012, and so that was the first time I went out to Reno, and since then, I mean, it's just, yeah, they're building shit all the damn time.
Yeah, and I think Reno's filling up with folks that they're sick of California laws, but still want to live somewhat close. And so you
Yeah,
get a lot of California transplants that can just go 10 miles over the border and they can deal with Nevada laws, but still be somewhat close.
you get a lot of those. You also get a lot of them they claim to be fleeing from California because of the laws, but then they vote for the same damn thing once they get here.
Yeah,
And you're just
that's
like,
true.
I wish you guys would. Like, I moved here, and I moved from rural Kansas at this. So I grew up in, like, just right on the border of Kansas and Oklahoma, and just rural country. I was living in Kansas at the before I moved out here, and I'm moving to rural Nevada. I knew a little bit about it, not a ton, but yeah, I love rural Nevada is awesome. I Vegas, I think California should just keep it, just annex it to California.
That's right.
Reno, I think we could kind of keep them in line.
Right. That
But
so if you agree with that mentality, I've got a good friend named Kalen Beasley. He's a musician, and he's
okay,
got a great song that's called I'm trying to think. I think it's called "Like the Place You Left." And he
okay,
lives in Cody, Wyoming, and the song is about Cody, Wyoming, because there's a lot of people moving into that area as well. But
mm,
basically, he says we're fine. It's fine if you want to move here. We'll be welcoming if you want to come in. Whatever. We don't care where you're from, but don't come here and make this place like the place that you just left.
yeah,
And I think that's true for a lot. I mean, it's not just Cody, it's not just Reno. It's a lot of places in the rural United States that people want to
right,
leave because they don't like what's happening where they're at, and then they go move to these I mean, it's happening in the town I live in now too, where people move in there, but you can't treat those places the same way that you treated the places that you left, because why did you leave in the first place? If if
Yeah.
if you liked what was going on there, so don't come to our Wyoming or our rural Nevada and try and turn this into what you left.
Yeah, it's like if you got a little hipster restaurant, go build your hipster restaurant. People will come to it. But don't vote for more taxes and bullshit. Like that's the part that really pisses people off. Like you'll get some of those grizzled old cowboys to walk into your hipster restaurant one time if it's good. And and like that's the good thing about the hipsters. They usually bring pretty cool shit like that to town, but
Yeah,
like don't bring any of the other bullshit with it. Like do what you're good at, and if it's good and people like it, they'll be nice to you. It's rural people are pretty friendly for the most part until they're not, and then when they're not, that's when you have an issue.
that's right. I agree.
Um, yeah. So you come back from Australia. Where did you head to from there?
Um, so I went to Australia, came back, finished my last semester of college, graduated, and I realized that I had some insight from folks that had been. I got a degree in animal science and also one in agricultural business, and I knew some folks
Hmm.
that graduated before me, with the same kind of degrees, and they were telling me that they were getting passed over, uh, for people with a high school education that were bilingual, as opposed to just somebody with a college degree. And so
Hmm.
that got me thinking. I thought, man, I've never taken a Spanish class in my life. I don't know any Spanish, uh, and it's obviously more and more becoming a really important thing to know Spanish in the agricultural industry, because more
Yeah.
and more of the workers that are involved and people involved, speak Spanish, and sometimes only Spanish.
Yeah.
So I figured at that point, I didn't really want to go out and get a big boy job and like settle down. So I got to thinking, how am I going to learn Spanish as fast as possible? Uh, so I figured I would just go to another country that only speaks Spanish, but also does ranch work, because that's all I know how to do, and go down there and pick up Spanish. So what I ended up doing was moving to Argentina. Lived with gauchos for a while, on a couple different outfits down there, and I just studied Spanish nonstop. And then what I was studying, I used an app on my phone, to learn new words and stuff like that, and I'd go try and use them the next day, and I began to understand more and more Spanish. So by the time I left Argentina, I was not fluent, but I understood a whole lot more than I would have taken a class or something like that. So, I went down to Argentina and had a dang good time. I love that place. I wish my Spanish was better while I was down there, but I was basically just riding with gauchos every day, guys that couldn't read or write, let alone speak a second language. So
Yeah.
I learned a lot down there. Went down to Argentina, and until I got sick, I got Zika, and Zika's
Oh,
a mosquito-borne. I don't know if it's a virus, illness of some kind.
I
Um,
think it's a virus. Yeah.
I think that's probably right. Because I was down there right around the time of the Rio Olympics, and I
Oh, okay.
remember them advertising that pregnant women should not go to Rio because of the Zika virus. Because that's
Hmm.
that's the virus that, if you get it while you're pregnant, there's like some shrunken head syndrome, or
Oh,
there's
no
problems
shit.
with the baby, basically.
You weren't pregnant, were you?
No, luckily,
Oh,
I
that's
hadn't gotten
good.
pregnant during my time down there.
Dodged a bullet there.
Right. So but I did get it, and it did make me very sick, and it actually started shutting down my liver. And
Mm.
so I was in like stage 1 liver failure, and I didn't know that while I was down there, but I just felt horrible for
Ugh.
a while, and I couldn't eat nothing. I was just dry heaving all the time, and couldn't figure out why. So eventually, I decided I probably ought to just go back home and talk to a doctor. And when I did, uh, they basically ruled out everything but Zika. They said, we can't, it doesn't matter if you have it because there's no mosquitoes up here that transmit it anyways. So
Hmm.
we're not even going to test you for it. So I don't know for sure that I had it, but all signs pointed to that. And but yeah, I was in bad shape. I had to really kind of clean up my life and uh, eat a very healthy diet, no alcohol, no going out partying. I was tired all the time, and it took probably 2, 3 months after I got back
Mm.
for me to get better.
Dang. That's rough. Um, those gauchos were they more like the indigenous Argentines, or were they more of like European ancestry?
Yeah, so the weird thing in Argentina is there's and it sounds like you kind of know already, but there's a ton of European people that live in Argentina,
Hmm.
especially during um, like World War II times. A lot of Europeans fled down there. So you'd be walking down the street and there'd be a blonde-haired, blue-eyed person that you would never expect to speak Spanish, and that's the only language that they speak is Spanish. And so
Yeah.
that was kind of mind blowing to me at first to see that,
Well,
because
my boss for when I was in Kansas was from Argentina. He used to run that feedlot that Tyson and Cactus partnered on down in Argentina.
oh yeah,
And he's of Spanish descent originally.
right,
And so I learned a lot about Argentina from him, a lot more than, I mean, I didn't know much of anything about it. And yeah, and he was saying that like, there's whole villages up in the Andes that are, it's the Andes down there, isn't it?
yep,
Yeah, and they're just like little, almost like cookie cutter Bavarian villages where like they have like these roaring Oktoberfest, and they are just like straight up Hitler Youth that made it
oh
over there.
yeah, yeah. I went to one of those, not knowing what I was going into, but I went to this little German town, um, and it was a tourist attraction, basically
Hmm.
where the at that time in Argentina, I had met up with some college students that were doing study abroad. Some were German, some were Spanish, some were American. They were all doing a study abroad program, and I was not part of it, but I had just been robbed for literally everything I owned was taken from me, and the only thing I had left was, for whatever reason, I thought it was a good idea to put a credit card under the insole of my shoe. So
Hmm.
I got everything else got taken from me, and then I just had that one card. It almost had no money on it, but I was able to. It wasn't easy, but I transferred some money around and stuff and made it so I could at least still live down there. Had a couple $100 and met up with these students um, while I was living in a hostel, and they became some of my good friends. And they said, we're going to this place. I don't even remember what it was called, but it was just like this little German village in the middle of the mountains in Argentina. And
Hmm.
we went up there and spent a weekend up there. It was pretty cool to see. But while I was down there, I didn't know about all the crazy like Nazis fleeing to Germany and all that stuff that I've learned about it since, and I have no idea if that village had anything to do with it. But the German influence there is strong.
Yeah, it's yeah, I don't know how many of them went down there. When Germany fell in World War II, but I it was a pretty significant number that just got on a ship to Argentina, and um, I mean, they had like the Mossad and stuff like hunting people down. I like probably
Yeah,
still hunting people down. They're those Jewish folks. Turns out they hold a grudge for a long time. Like
yeah,
they hunted some fuckers down.
yeah. That I just was listening to a podcast with Tim Kennedy the other day,
Yeah.
and he's badass Green Beret Special
Mm,
Forces guy, and he got contracted to go down there and hunt down Nazis, and this was recently. I mean, like
yeah.
within the last 5 years, and so they definitely exist down there. And when I was down there, I had no idea. That was not even on my radar. And the place that we visited, I didn't see anything like that. That would, it was very German, but otherwise
Yeah.
it was just kind of touristy. We hiked down to a big ass waterfall and just swam underneath it for, you know, drank some wine next to the waterfall. It was a good time, but um,
Yeah.
I had no idea. There's conspiracy theories that Hitler actually died in Argentina.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard a few of those. I don't know if I believe it, but then when you start like researching how he allegedly died or supposedly died, and the Soviets didn't really release any sort of records at all, so you're like, did they get him? Did he kill
Yeah,
himself? I don't know.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's possible that he died down there. I don't know, but I
Yeah,
was just
it's
some
crazy.
naive 22-year-old kid just hanging out with gauchos and hot college chicks. So I didn't know any better.
Yeah. Did you use the same kind of tack they used down there, or did you bring your own?
No, so well, as far as bringing tack, um, anything that touches an animal in another country goes under intense inspection when you leave or
Oh,
come back. So it's dang near impossible to take anything with you or bring anything back that's been on an animal because
okay.
they're super strict about that. They don't want diseases brought in and out. So
Mm, yeah,
usually when I
makes sense.
travel, I just show up and hope that they have the stuff for me. Argentina was a fantastic example of this because those guys down there couldn't read or write. They made almost no money, and so they didn't. It's not like they had a spare rig sitting around. I mean, those guys
Yeah.
just went day to day getting by. And so when they had to put together a setup for me to ride, I had a horse, and I suppose I could have rode bareback the whole time. It might have been easier, but what they did was they went and they started like putting together a saddle for me. The owner of the place, he just dropped me off and he was like, "All right, this guy's American, doesn't speak very much Spanish. Here you go, he's working with you," and he took off. So I was just with these guys and we were doing our best to communicate, and so we caught my horse and they went to making a saddle for me. And Argentinian saddles traditionally they have no tree. There's nothing structural about it. It's just mostly leather and wool that makes up the
Mm,
saddle. So the one guy Juan that I was working with, he was like, "Oh, I got an idea," and he just disappears around the back of the barn and comes back like 5 minutes later, and he had found an old styrofoam cushion that was out of a couch, and he threw that up there as a pad to put on the horse, and then they did have this actual saddle, what they would call a saddle, and that basically is a soft uh, like leather roll in the front, kind of similar to squaw tits or buck and rolls or whatever you might call them, just like packed leather full of wool. And so you had one of those on the front and one of those on the back. And then the rest of it was just sewn together leather. No structure to it whatsoever. So we put that up there. But that thing doesn't have D-rings on it like a normal saddle does to secure it. So what you do is you basically put a cinch on top and you put a cinch on bottom, and you pull the latigos on both sides, and it holds that whole thing down. But then you put a sheepskin on top of that, and the sheepskin is just meant to be kind of padding or whatever. And we didn't have an extra one of those. So Juan, again, he's like, oh, I got an idea, and he runs off, and he comes back with a ratchet strap that like you would strap something down in your pickup with to tie that on. And one of the other guys working with me, he was like, oh, no, just give him mine. His was also a ratchet strap, but it was like a heavy duty 2-inch trucker ratchet strap. And, but it worked better than the one that Juan found. So the other guy took the 1-inch ratchet strap and ratchet strapped his saddle on, and then I ratchet strapped mine down. And then they found an old rusty bit, and they were using a rock to knock the rust off of it and everything to get it so it could be used. And Juan again disappears behind the barn, and he came back with like 20 foot of extension cord that he had just cut off with his knife. And so he braided like an extension cord, I think usually has 3 wires inside of it. And so he used the ends and braided it. He was great at braiding. And he braided the bit and made a headstall, braided the bit on there, and then he braided my my reins. And so I was using extension cord reins and extension cord headstall with a ratchet strap saddle. And that's what I rode in most of the time that I was down there.
Well, I mean, it makes you appreciate how how easy we got it up here.
Yeah, I mean, you walk into a guy's, most guys are pretty dang proud of their tack room and what they've accumulated over the years. And down there with those folks, they're lucky to get their kids fed. So they, if they just got a rig that'll let them get their job done every day, they're happy. So they don't have extra stuff sitting around. Everything they own, they use every single day.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, that's crazy. It's interesting talking to people who've been in different parts of the world, and like we just don't have a real sense of poverty. Like you can kind of see it in some of these inner cities. I mean, particularly like I think like Baltimore or like Jersey City or Newark, New Jersey, like places like that, or you can see a little bit of it. But compared to like Africa poor,
Yeah,
I mean that's your worlds apart.
yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, there's parts of the U.S. that would experience that, like you're saying, inner cities or the Appalachians. There's a lot of really poor folks that live up there, and and I didn't grow up with much money. My family was pretty poor, or at least so I thought. And then I went and lived in these other places, and it's like, man, I had a lot, and I'm very fortunate to have even, amongst peers in the United States, it seems like I didn't have a whole heck of a lot. But then you go live with these folks, and I mean, these people would, almost everywhere I went, they literally would have given their firstborn child just to have American citizenship. Like they so badly wanted to come here to try and fulfill the American dream.
Yeah. It's it makes you appreciate Yeah, like just how good we got it.
That's right.
Uh, Argentina seems like I'd like to go visit there sometime too. That just I know there's a lot of cool country down there, and I'd like to go see those like the gauchos work on one of those big ranches and just you know just see how they do things.
Yeah, you ought to. The one of the cool things about Argentina is it's a very long, skinny country. So
Mm,
so northern and Chile is even more this way because it's even skinnier and long.
yeah.
But both of those countries, like northern Argentina, you're in the Amazon forest, the southern tips of the
Mm,
Amazon, and it's swamps. Like I was working cows, and there's capybaras swimming around, and anacondas and stuff like that. That's where I got Zika. Was in the northern part of Argentina. It's a swamp, and the southern part, like you go way down south, and you're talking like Canadian type winters and stuff down there. I mean, they're way
yeah.
south, and so they have every bit of the climate basically. They've got from jungle clear down to, you know, almost Arctic type of
Yeah, because
stuff.
that's the closest point to Antarctica is
That's
the
right.
southern tip of
Ushuaia is
Argentina.
the southern tip of South America. That's where most people set off from to go to Antarctica.
Yeah, I I was it was the book Hawaii by James Michener. I had to read it in high school, and they were talking about those ships that had to go around the Horn of South America, and like
Mm.
that was a rough deal, and it was cold as hell.
Yeah, yeah, and Argentina control. They've got all of that, so
Yeah,
you can work with gauchos that are in 2 feet of snow half the year, like we are in Wyoming, or you can work with
yeah.
gauchos that are in the rainforest, and
Mm,
you got both ends of it. So
yeah, that's interesting. So, and how long did you spend in Argentina?
I think that was about 4 months as well. I planned to stay down there quite a bit longer, but when I got really sick, it was kind of an emergency thing to get home. So I came back
Yeah,
much sooner than I expected.
yeah, that makes sense. Like Argentina is a fairly advanced country, but that's compared to the rest of the world. Like United States is still, I mean, it's
If I
for all
was
the shit about our healthcare system. There's not another country on earth I'd rather have to go to get surgery in.
Yeah, yeah. If I was going to live in a country outside of the United States, it would be Argentina. But
Yeah,
that's mostly because Argentina is just right on the edge where it's civilized enough that you could I think you could comfortably raise, have a wife and kids there and feel comfortable with that.
yeah,
But it's not as civilized as here. I mean, it's the government's still very corrupt. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on, but Argentina is like right on the cusp of that,
yeah,
where it's still wild, but not so wild that I would never condone anybody doing what I have done. I was young and reckless and went and did it and don't regret it in the slightest. But I was a single young white guy doing this, and I don't know if it could have been done by a woman because that's it's kind of the unfortunate truth that uh, you know the way cultures see women in other countries is very different than
yeah.
here. Very different. So
Very, very different.
so like me going out and doing this stuff, I'm not saying a woman couldn't do it. They surely could, but like the things that they would have to deal with opposed to what I dealt with would be very different and they'd have a lot more kind of hurdles to overcome. And yeah, I don't know. That's kind of a rabbit hole conversation we could go down, because it's wild in other places,
Well, and
and unsafe.
yeah, so I used to work for a guy in college. His dad, um, he invented the critter call. I don't know if you've ever used
The
those
coyote call.
coyote calls. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a guy named Major Boddicker, and he sold them all over the world. And he was a really interesting guy in his own. Like he was a smoke jumper up in like the northern part of Minnesota for a while.
Oh, badass.
And he's got 2 PhDs. He taught at CSU for a while. I think it's like rangeland ecology and wildlife biology or something like something like big time outdoorsman,
It sounds
huge
like a
hunter.
guy I'd like to meet.
He's a hoot. I really enjoyed that guy. And but he was talking about he got hired by a bunch of jackal hunters in South Africa
Yeah.
to show him how to use this call. And he was he's like, now I grew up north. I think he was from Iowa originally. And he's like, so I didn't see any of the southern racism, but he's like, I grew up in that time. And he's like, that was mild compared to South Africa. He
That
said
is,
that was like a PG version of South Africa.
well, I would say the same thing. That was my experience in South Africa as well.
Yeah, it really kind of cracks me up, particularly with like this woke stuff, which I think when they first like kind of coined the term woke, when it was mostly just like it wasn't so much to do with racism and whatever, which then it morphed into whatever the fuck it is now. But it was more just saying like, I see what the system for what it is. Like I'm awake to how the system works,
Right.
and a lot of black folks are. Like it's not so much that the system is racist, it's the system doesn't work if you don't have money. Like it doesn't work for you if you don't have money. And that was kind of where the woke stuff came from. Um but they've gone off on this deep end where like everything is is offensive, and you're just like, take a look just anywhere outside the United States, and and even go into Europe, like civilized Europe, allegedly, like they're racist as fuck over there. It's like compared to us, like they're way more racist than we are. So um yeah, for all those folks, just like, hey man, for all the problems, it's still a hell of a lot better than just about any other country on earth as far as race relations go.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's unfortunate that it's even an issue, but it is. And
Yeah.
um, for I guess just at least in my experience, going to South Africa was the first time I ever experienced like serious and true racism. Like it
Yeah.
was still, because they're, some of my best friends over there lived through apartheid.
Mm.
So they're desegregating the country, and a lot of these people, like they're, especially old folks over there now, they look at their younger years, the glory days, as anybody does, like thinking that the
Mm.
younger years were better. Well, for them, they were segregated, so they're still extremely racist, and
Yeah.
it's like mind-boggling to me to have seen that, because I lived in some of the most like rural, conservative, old Afrikaans areas over there that were just incredibly racist, like the last people to let go of of
Yeah.
segregation over there, and it was just mind. I mean, it's obviously gone now, but it doesn't mean that the hatred or whatever you want to call it is gone, because it's not. I dealt with people on a regular basis that were just probably some of the most racist people I've ever met.
Yeah. That's kind of what he was saying too, is like, well, and were you there when the, because the government's now like majority black dominated, like the whites have always been, minority population wise, but they used to have the power,
Hmm.
and like they were just like burning farms down for the, for retribution, I guess, for a while. And I don't know, were you over there when any of that shit was going down?
Yeah, I was, and I wasn't aware that that was happening when I went there, but they called them the farm killings, and I didn't see it ever myself, but I know multiple people that their families were killed or maimed, whatever horrible things happened. And there's still things happening down there where they're um, I don't I don't want to get like too deep political into this stuff, but they like basically there's one political party down there that um, they're a communist party, and they're gaining power down there, and a lot of
Mm,
their uh, appeal to people is that they're going to take this land back from white folks who own it. So I have a really good friend down there that he's a veterinarian, and him and his brother together went out and bought a farm. They didn't
mm,
inherit it, nothing. They paid for it themselves, and they're looking at possible retribution uh, without payment, which means they they could potentially have the farm that they bought 5 years ago taken from them, and
mm.
uh, they would get no repayment for it, and it would just be kind of gifted off to somebody else to kind of put them in their place. So it's a very intense political climate down there, because
Yeah.
it's not good. They deal with stuff we don't deal with up here, and it's wild, and there's a lot of violence. Um, I saw more dead bodies in South Africa than anywhere else I ever saw. That I mean, it was just kind of an everyday part of life that people get killed down there. Life is cheap. People don't think twice about it, and it can be a dangerous place if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time.
And that country has nukes as well, which is the crazy thing. Like that that's a scary thought. Like that those fuckers have nukes as well. And it's we're about 250 years removed from colonialism. Um I mean, if you count the westward expansion, the way when we for the most part exterminated the Indians. I mean, like they don't like to say that in history books, but we did a pretty good job of just killing off almost all of them. And that's the closest we've had to colonialism in the last 250 years. But like South Africa, that was just a couple generations ago.
Yeah, and I mean, not even. I mean, some of my best friends down there, they're the same age as me. They were
Mm,
born in apartheid. They don't
mm,
necessarily remember it, but people 10 years old, people that are 40 in South
yeah,
Africa, remember growing up in apartheid. So
yeah.
completely segregated schools, all that stuff. They, I mean, they remember it. They're not far removed from it at all.
Now that that was a Dutch colony, right?
Well, so this is where things get even more tricky, is that There was British. There was a Dutch colony there. There was also a British colony there, and there was a huge war that was fought called the Boer War. And the
Mm.
Boer War was between the Dutch and the British, fighting
Oh,
over South
okay.
Africa. And it was a brutal war. And all of the native South Africans were involved with it too. Like they had to pick sides. And I actually went to a place when I was in South Africa with a coworker of mine. He was probably at this time he was in his 40s, and we went to a sale barn uh, in northern South Africa, and it was that place was where I witnessed some of the most racist stuff I've ever seen in that area. And then we went back to on the way back home. We stopped at his dad's farm, the farm he had grown up on, and his dad was like a 85, maybe 90-year-old Afrikaans man, and he spoke English perfectly. So did his son, but they both spoke Afrikaans as well. And he had a couple of black guys that worked for him on the farm, and he treated him pretty horribly. It was shocking to me. And then um, he came up and met me, and my friend says, "Dad, this is my friend Jake. He's visiting. He doesn't speak Afrikaans. He only speaks English. So um, you have to speak to him in English." And and his dad, the only words he would speak to me in English were, "I don't speak fucking British," and went straight back to Afrikaans. And that's for war. He had no love for English speaking people. Even though I wasn't British, didn't matter. He refused to speak English to me because he just had a hatred for English and the English language because of the Boer War.
Yeah, that's crazy. Um, yeah, it's funny when you get to delving into some of that stuff around the world. Is man, people have long memories too, and there's still people fighting over shit in the Middle East that only goes back to a generation ago, or several generations ago, but they're still fighting over it today. And just like, man, people have long memories, particularly when atrocities are committed. They got really long memories over in certain parts of the world.
Absolutely. I agree. And I've seen that many places.
Yeah. So what what did you do when you were over in South Africa? How long were you there?
South Africa, I was there. I've actually been to South Africa twice. Um, so in my book, I kind of condense it down to one thing because it didn't make sense to split it up. But I've been there twice. For both times I was there for about 3 months, so 6 months total in South Africa. Um, well, you know what? First, let me just give you the rundown of where I went, like in order. So I went I went to Australia first, then I went to Argentina, then I went
Mm.
to Sweden, and then from
Oh yeah.
Sweden I went down to South Africa, and then I went to Mexico, and then I went to Mongolia. So that's
Okay.
just like a basic timeline of everywhere I went. Um, but so South Africa was on the second half of the journey, I guess. Um,
Mm.
and so I love South Africa. It was 100% the place that changed me as a person the most. And it was just soul shaking to be down there and be around those people. I love Africa. I love African people, and I don't know that I'd ever want to live there, but just the culture itself is fantastic. Being down there.
I've heard nothing but like similar things about Africa. It just like unbelievable poverty, but also like unbelievable beauty at the same time.
Right.
And yeah, I've talked to a lot of military guys that spent some time in Africa, and they of course when you're in the military, you're either on a U.S. base or you're in the absolute worst part of the country usually.
Right.
Um, chasing down whoever you're chasing down, and then my buddy Miles, Matt, I don't know if you ever come across him, Miles Fedinas. He's out of Craig, Colorado. He's a pretty big time hunter, and he's been all over the world. But he
I haven't. I'd
he
like to meet him though.
he's a cool guy. And he was saying like Africa is just amazing. He's hunted over there several times, and he said if it wasn't for like the political situation over there all the time, just being kind of in limbo, he'd live over there. But
Yeah,
so
agreed.
um so you worked on a dairy over there?
I did. It was for about 3 days that I worked on a dairy. It was just to check it out and see it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it was the first place I worked in South Africa. So,
Mm.
something that was surprising to me, and I would imagine surprising to most people, is there's a huge Indian population in South Africa.
Like
People,
Indian?
yeah, from India,
Hmm.
and they've a lot of them are like multi-generational, have lived down there. Some of them are new, but I didn't expect that. But the farm at that dairy farm, the farm manager was a black guy. He was I believe he was Zulu. Um, South Africa gets weird because they call it the Rainbow Nation. They have 11 official languages. I don't
Holy
even know
shit.
what all of them are, but in South Africa, if you don't speak 4 or 5 languages, you're behind. That's the
Huh.
way it works. It's a lot of different cultures mixing together. So the guy who managed it, I lived with him for a couple days and went and helped him on his daily chores and routine, and got to talk with a bunch of the people. And but he's a Zulu guy, but the assistant manager at the time was a Indian gal, and she
Huh.
was in her early, maybe mid 20s, and she, yeah, like she was born in South Africa, but her parents were born in India,
Hmm.
and she was the assistant manager of this giant 1,000 head dairy farm. They had a big rotary milker that they used.
Huh.
Um, so fairly high tech. I mean, not the highest tech, but it was uh, it was a big, like, full blown dairy in that country.
Hmm. And so what'd you do after that? Like did you work other places there in South Africa?
Yeah. So I spent a couple days there just kind of learning, and then I uh, I went out to, um, I guess it was 2 or 3 different ranches that I worked on that had sheep and cattle mostly, both places. And so it was mostly cattle work. I was horseback some of the time. Sometimes I was just like in the pickup hanging out with the manager, just figuring out where we're gonna move this and that bunch around in their pastures. And but so that particular place, heck, I don't even know where I was in South Africa at that point when I went to that dairy, because I was literally just like a stray dog jumping into people's pickups. Like if they had food and a bed for me to sleep in, I would just jump in with them. So I went to that
Huh.
dairy. I think the dairy was around Durban in South Africa. The town's called Durban. I don't remember. And then from there, I went down to another ranch close to Swartberg, South Africa. And Swartberg was way in the middle of nowhere. KwaZulu-Natal was the province that we were in, and we were right up against the border of a country called Lesotho. And a lot of people don't
Oh, that's
realize,
like right there in the middle, right?
yeah, exactly. A lot of people don't realize that there's a landlocked country inside of South Africa, and it's called Lesotho. Lesotho, those people are badass because the way that South Africa ended up with all of these different languages and all this stuff going on is because back in the day there was a guy named Shaka Zulu, and Shaka
Mm-hmm.
Zulu was like the conqueror of Africa. So he started up in the middle and he worked his way down and he conquered all of Africa. So when he conquered all of the southern part, the one part that he didn't conquer was Lesotho, because Lesotho, they live up on a big what do you call that? Like a mesa, basically,
Mm-hmm.
but huge. Like cliffs are their borders. So they could
Oh,
throw
okay.
down rocks and arrows and whatever they had to keep Shaka Zulu from overtaking them. And so this is 300 years ago. But South Africa became a whole country because he had conquered all of that. And Lesotho could not be conquered. So they were the tiny little mountain tribe in the middle that
Hmm.
that wouldn't get overtaken. So they're still their own independent country. They're pretty poor, much poorer than South Africans as a whole right now. And so a lot of those guys come out of Lesotho and they work in South Africa. They're incredible horsemen. They basically live horseback,
Hmm.
and yeah, they're great people. And because South Africans as a whole are not really horse people,
Hmm.
Lesotho folks are really horse people. They live and die by the horse.
Huh. That's interesting. I've seen that country on a map a whole bunch. I always played like they have that Wordle game on you guess the word every day. But
Hmm.
they have the same thing, and they just show you the shape of a country, and you have six guesses, and that's how I know about Lesotho. But it's I didn't know that whole story behind. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Um, how was it cowboying down there? Like what kind of gear are you when you're horseback? What do you what's the gear like?
It's the worst I've ever seen. It's very it's I mean it's Africa to a T though. They would buy these saddles that cost, I would say at best like $100,
Mm-hmm.
maybe 200, because it's all they can afford, and that's what they would ride in. And um, they were fiberglass trees, uh, kind of shaped like an Australian saddle, if you know what that looks
Mm-hmm.
like. Like it's just a bare Australian tree, and then they would use nylon to hook some English stirrups onto that sucker. And they were the most, of anywhere I've ever been in the world, the most uncomfortable saddles I ever rode. But it was what those people could afford. And that was
Yeah.
if they could even afford a saddle like that. So
Yeah.
they were horrible. I never had a good experience horseback in those saddles as far as like sitting on a horse. They rubbed you raw almost immediately. They're
Uh,
pretty rough. But um yeah, great horsemen though. They had a different type of horsemanship that was it was not like you're not going to get a cutting horse out of South Africa. You're not going to get like a really good using horse for the ranch out of
mm,
South Africans, but they, especially those Lesotho guys that were working illegally in South Africa, they'd bring their horses down and that was their most prized possession. So those horses, like they had them trained to lay down, to bow, to do all this stuff, and so they'd lay their horses down and lay next to them and like snuggle up to them. I mean, their horses were their best friends.
hmm.
Um, but that was the Lesotho guys. So the South African guys, this is where it was very different. A lot of South African guys would not ride a horse. They wouldn't step on one. They didn't want anything to do with it. And the
Huh.
reason why was because I mean these guys are covering a lot of miles every day, and the ranch manager is telling them, I don't care how you cover the miles, just cover them. And these guys would choose to do it on foot. And the reason why is because if they got bucked off or they got hurt somehow on a horse, there's no safety net to catch you.
Yeah.
So if you say you break your leg on a horse, one, you're not going to the hospital, so your leg's probably going to heal wrong. But
Mm-hmm.
two, if you become crippled and your leg doesn't work right, you might be lucky if you've got some kids around that might pay for you to live, but the more than likely nobody is going to give you any money whatsoever. So to these guys, it was easier to walk than it was to ride just because they knew the risk of possibly getting hurt on a horse was not worth their time.
Hmm.
It would ruin their life. It would end their life basically if they got hurt on a horse. And the guys from Lesotho didn't see it that way, but the guys from South Africa, they would rather walk than ride a horse because they couldn't risk possibly getting hurt on a horse.
Huh. Now, now, when we're talking the natives there, these are all black folks. Like they're like
Yeah,
really dark black folks. Lesotho, South Africa, but it's still very tribal over there. Yeah.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. That's exactly right. They they this was the weird thing that I didn't. I still don't know if I fully grasp it, but you have Zulus, you have Sutus, you have Osas, you have like all these Swatis. You have all these different people that speak a different language, and when they speak a different language, that also means they're from a different tribe. So when
mm-hmm.
South Africa speaks 11 different languages, that means there's 11 different groups of people that identify with each one of those groups, and that even goes amongst white people as well. So you like the Afrikaans people did not particularly like the English people, and so that goes back to the story I was telling, where um,
Yeah.
depending on what language you spoke, and this is also why people had to speak 5 different languages to get work done.
Huh.
They would they would speak in all these different languages, and each one of those was kind of a tribe of people. I don't know all of the particulars behind this, but I did meet people when I was there, guys that when I was there, they were probably in their 40s. They, you could see like deep scars on their cheeks and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked one of my best friends over there what that was about. And he said that pre-apartheid, there was so much tribal fighting amongst Zulus, Zulus and Sutus and all these other people that when you were born, they would take a razor blade and on your cheeks they would cut whatever, like basically a brand, but it was done with a razor blade, and then they would pack it with ash to turn it into a pretty large scar.
Hmm.
So I don't know. Let's just say, for example, like two lines on your cheek meant you were Zulu, one meant you were Sutu, and three meant you were Sutu or Osa. So infants were being cut and having this ash packed into their wound to make it scar up really big. And that was basically your ownership to these tribes. So say you're walking down you're a mother and you might have the scars on your cheek and you're walking down the road, and this happened all the time while I was down there. They would be like young kids with sticks and rocks and whatever weapons they could find, and they would burn a big tire in the middle of the road, and they would stop you. Like if you drove past them, they would destroy your car. So you had to stop and talk to them, and they would basically, when I was there, they just wanted like a small fee to drive past them. But back in the day, the reason why these people had their cheeks scarred is because they it was tribal warfare, and if you tried to pass this checkpoint to like get into this town and you didn't have the right tribal markings, you would get killed. So even your infants needed to have those correct tribal markings for you to pass a checkpoint that they had set up.
Jeez. That's crazy.
But this is 30, 40 years ago. So
Yeah.
it's not a super modern thing, but you still run into people all the time that have the markings on them that signify that. It was tribal warfare.
That's crazy. I'm guessing it was a little a little bit different in Sweden.
Yeah, Sweden was kind of the opposite. Sweden was incredibly safe, well taken care of. They Yeah, Sweden was the by far the least dangerous place that I went to. They battled with a different set of restrictions holding them back that we don't deal with, and nobody in the world deals with besides them. And it was kind of the government um, being right in the middle of their business all the time. And if the government showed up uh, in the middle of the day, it didn't matter what you were doing. Whatever the government told you to do, you had to do. So, like any hormones of any kind were illegal in Sweden. So they could show up and say take that bunch of cattle, bring them into the corrals right now, and we're going to take 3 random specimens out of that and make them stand in a tarp until all 3 of them piss. And then we're going to collect the piss and test it for hormones. So it didn't matter what you were doing that day. If the European Union veterinarians showed up and said that, you had to do it. All of the cows had an ear tag that went straight to the Swedish government, and so when you put them in your chute, like squeeze chute to hold them, it would read that, and they would read the weights of the cattle, the health of the cattle. They would do, like, they were just, you had to have your entire government database basically up to date at all times, or they would come out and check you. So Sweden was not wild, other than the aspect of there was so much government involved in what they did on a day-to-day basis that it was very different from here.
Huh. That how so was that, were you on a dairy out there as well, or was that a cow outfit, or?
No, that was a cow calf outfit when I was there, and that place was kind of it was not the normal Swedish operation that you would get, because there's a cap financially, how much, or not financially, but there's a cap on how much land you can own as a citizen. So because of that, the cap was fairly low. I don't know what the cap was, but you could not own enough land to have like a normal cattle ranch in that area.
Huh.
So the people I worked for were kind of an exception to that because they leased a big military base.
Oh, okay.
And that base was there for them to practice with their tanks.
Mm-hmm.
And so they needed these big wide open fields. So it was thousands of acres that these people had, but nobody else had that type of opportunity to run that many cattle. So
I see.
they had that's why I say it's the biggest operation in Sweden, because nobody else had enough land to even compare to these people.
Huh. That's interesting. How was it? Was it more like a farmer type operation over there, or they check cattle horseback? How was I know nothing about that part of the world agriculture wise.
Yeah, so that family, I mean, it was about as cowboy as it comes, as far as you can go in Sweden. They would import tack and cattle equipment like panels, gates, all that stuff. They would import it from the U.S. or Canada, and they would, because this particular family that I worked for, they had worked in Australia, Canada, the United States, so they knew how we did things, and so basically what they did with their operation is run it the same way we do.
Okay.
So it was not that different from here because they were just trying to mimic an American operation over there. But they had to go above and beyond and pay kind of exorbitant amounts of money for the tack they used. They had to train their own horses so that they could use them for the type of stuff that we do. because they're the only people in Europe that do that.
Huh. That's Swedish cowboys. That's crazy. Um,
Yeah.
how how are the people over there? I've heard those Nordic people can be kind of uptight.
What? Say that again.
I said, how are the people up there? I've heard those Nordic countries, the people can be kind of uptight.
Oh, no, they were fantastic. Swedish people, as far as English goes, like they learn Swedish first and English second. And as far as that goes, Swedish people have by far the easiest accent to understand of anywhere that I've ever been.
Yeah.
And everybody knows it. Like the whole country speaks English.
Mm.
Or at least understands a good part of it. So, for example, we had some cows out on the highway one day, and I was the only person home. And it was a guy, a cyclist, that was on a bicycle riding by, saw the cows out, and he just pedaled over to the house where I was. And I pulled the door open, and he immediately started speaking to me in Swedish. And I was like, I apologize. I'm American. I don't speak Swedish. And he's like, oh, excuse me. I'm very sorry. And immediately switched to English. And in
Mm.
perfect English told me that we had 4 cows out on the highway. And he didn't want to see them get hit or somebody get in an accident. And I said, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I went and put them back in. But that's a good example of just being in Sweden. You could go to the grocery store and they would tell you something in Swedish, which I learned some after a while, and I could understand what they said, so I would just skim by on that. But if I ever had a question and I was like, sorry, I don't speak Swedish, can you tell me in English? Almost every single person I met over there could
Mm.
immediately switch to English, and not broken English, like perfect English. They could
Huh.
switch over and speak to me. So I never felt like they were uptight or too too good for me in any way. I thought they were very kind people that I dealt
Huh.
with.
That's yeah. I've never, like I said, I've never been over there, but I'd heard that, and but I also don't know many people that spend any time over there, so that's good to know.
I mean, they they could be kind of pretentious people. I don't know, but it was not an experience I had.
Yeah. No, that's good to hear. I always like to hear the best in people. You know, there's what I have learned is like people are just people, no matter no matter where they're from, they're just people, and so everybody's got their own way of thinking, but they're still just
That's
people.
right. That's exactly right.
Um, so then
Yeah,
you
I
went.
think
Oh, go ahead.
gonna find kindness, and you have to trust people in order to do that. But also, um, you have to be careful who you trust. Um, that's been one of my biggest kind of revelations in traveling is who you trust. Because I've trusted a ton of strangers, gone and lived at their house and slept on their couch or whatever spare bedroom, and these are people that could easily be a serial killer or who knows. And I don't know. There's kind people all over the world, but I've also learned that there's people that um, they'll take advantage of you, and you have to be
Yeah,
careful about that.
yeah, yeah. That's for sure. So then you went to Mexico. Imagine it was. Yeah, I've I've talked to a couple people that worked on some big ranches down in Mexico, and they say it's kind of like the old West out there.
It is. It absolutely is. It's exactly like what you see in the movies. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, it's exactly what you see in the movies, and they it's like these old dusty, dirt roads through town, and um, they still live in, you know, a, not adobe, but like mud brick houses
Mm,
and like that, and they're man, I would Mexico is such a great place, and Mexican people are such great people. Um, I've told people before that I would move down there in a heartbeat uh, if there wasn't all the cartel stuff going on and all the crazy. I dealt with that when I was down there, and because otherwise that is such a great place to live. It's a good climate, good people. I love Mexico.
yeah. Um, what was kind of the cartel situation? For the rural Mexicans, you always hear about the border violence and then, um, but like I'm curious as to what it's like for your average like just rural Mexican rancher or whatever.
Yeah. So got to think about what I'm going to say about this. Uh, Mexico, the government doesn't really have a lot of say down there. It seems
Mm-hmm.
like where I was at, the government, um, they, the government is the cartels, which is unfortunate. But they do the job that our government does up here. Um,
Yeah.
like if you look at it at its simplest form, and they it's dangerous, and the everyday life for a rural Mexican in an agricultural area is that you keep your head down and you don't say anything, you don't talk to anybody, you don't ask questions, and you go about your life, and you know that it's around you all the time,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't ask questions about it. And if you do, you get killed. Like when I was down there at the exact time when I was living in northern Mexico, there was some American white tourist dude that he was in the next town over from where I was, and he was drunk and he was asking a lot of questions about how things went down and stuff, just things he shouldn't have been asking. And as far as I knew, he got cut up into pieces and put in a 55-gallon barrel and dumped over the side of a bridge.
Oh
And
shit.
he was, but it was all because he was just asking too many questions. They thought that he was an FBI informant or something like that,
Hmm.
and so that's why they did that. So I stayed clear of that. There was at this time my Spanish was fairly clear, um, And I guess I'll just say this: there would sometimes be guys that showed up that unquestionably they were not from that area or not of that um, income class. I guess like they had much more money than everybody else,
Mm-hmm.
and just because of what I heard and what I knew, I would steer clear of those people. Never talk to them, never ask them questions. It was none of my business.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't know. Mexico was probably the scariest place, not because of what happened. I mean, I got caught up in a gunfight and some other like cartel stuff while I was down there. Um, but because even now, like on this podcast, I don't really want to say too much about it because mostly because I don't want it to affect the family I was living with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're super powerful. They are the government down there, and you hear like all the killings and stuff do, and that's of course that's real, but there's much smaller things that residents deal with on a day-to-day basis of um, just like they've run your life. Like if you own a firearm, that your worry is not the Mexican government. You have to have that registered through the cartel down there.
Huh.
They need to know that you own that. Even if it's a like you're running a high fence mule deer hunting farm type thing. They need to know. And they come in, they take, you know, well, they do whatever they do, but they know what you own, and they are exactly what most governments do.
Hmm. It's interesting. I have a feeling that we're gonna have troops over in Mexico here before too long, and that's unfortunate. But yeah, it's funny they got all their power through the drug trade, and they didn't really rise to power till drugs became illegal here.
Yeah, that's a whole nother wormhole we could go down.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
the drug trade, and yeah, it's financing a lot of that type of stuff. They don't. I mean, yeah. That sometimes they manufacture it down there. Sometimes all they're doing is passing it through, like it came from South America, produced down there, and all they're doing is just getting it through the country. But you're right. A lot of the majority of the power that they have comes from money made off the gun trade or the drug trade.
yeah,
Probably, uh, but they the part that was most interesting to me is that the cartel down there plays the same role that our government does.
yeah,
And anything you're monitored for in this country, that's what the cartel monitors you for in Mexico.
yeah,
Plus more than that. And they don't have the technology here, or like we do here. But um, yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, and I it's basically an underground government is what it is.
yeah. It's I will say though, like, another world war ever happen, like, I would be putting these cartel guys as like my head of logistics. 'Cause if you listen to a lot of military historians, they'll say like it's not the armies that win wars, it's the guys that can run logistics and feed the armies that win wars. And the Mexican cartels have got logistics down to inexact science, but it is those guys can get anything anywhere.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Uh, if
Um,
if we ended up in a world war where it was North Americans, and I mean Canadians, Mexicans, Americans, all those people together, you'd have a hell of a fight on your hands if you were fighting us. That's all I know.
yeah, I see. I'm not ever worried about like Russia or China invading us. I mean, they might be able to nuke us, but anybody nukes anybody, that's it for the world. Like the world's over if that shit happens. So I'm not really that worried about nukes. But it's always there in the back of your mind. You're like that shit could happen.
Sure.
Um, but if anybody tried to invade the United States, I mean, it would be a just ungodly slaughter. Uh, you've got 3,000 miles of ocean on either side, and we spend more than the next 11 countries combined on our military. Like, we got a lot of toys.
I agree. And we've got a whole lot of badasses right now in our military that are chomping at the bit.
Well, and then we've also got 400 million guns in the domestic population as well. So like there's that.
Right.
Like
Right. If it
it's
goes if it goes to that point, good luck. But even, you know, guys like I've been listening to a lot of podcasts and stuff with Marcus Luttrell uh,
mm,
and Kennedy and all these guys that are, you know, they're still very capable human beings. But if you listen to them talk, I mean, they're older, they're out of special forces and stuff like that. And,
yeah.
they're kind of on the backside of their career. You listen to guys like that talk about it, and they're like, "Look, I don't want my kids to fight this war. I want I want the people that I know that are still alive to fight this because
Yeah.
we're a country full of badasses, and we have all these guys like Marcus Luttrell might be 40 years old, but you can't tell me that that dude is still not one of the baddest dudes on the planet and
Oh
gonna
yeah.
mm,
Well,
and
and there's a lot of those GWAT veterans that are just, you know, yeah, I mean, we've got the best military in the world. Um, but our government gets us into wars that we can't win, and then like that a lot of times it looks like they don't even want to win. They just want to keep the gravy train rolling for the arms manufacturers. You know, what it seems to be. But in the meantime, yeah, we've raised up a hellacious bunch of warriors that really they wouldn't mind a good fight if it's for the right reasons.
yeah, I think that's right. There's a whole lot of guys that are, you know, maybe retired or stepped out of the military and they've just got back from Iraq, Afghanistan, all that stuff. They're not active duty, I guess, but you bet your ass that this country's covered when it comes to those folks.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of those things. I'm not really worried about, but I do think there's something brewing with Mexico between the governments anyways. I mean, those cartels are a real problem, but I mean it's kind of like with Saddam. He was a real fucking asshole, but look what happens when you take him out of power. Shit
Yeah,
runs amok, and it's kind of Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's much different from where you are to the rest of Mexico. Like the cartel just kind of runs shit, and the government will kind of they'll kind of make some arrests and flex a little bit, but shit, they arrested El Chapo's son, and the cartel just surrounded the military and said let him go, and they did. Yeah, it was just it's you almost have to work with the cartels instead of try to get rid of them at this point because they're if you take out the cartels, who God knows who takes over because the government doesn't have any power.
Yeah, that's why I say they are the government down there. Like it's crazy because it's very turbulent for people living down there, but
Mm,
they are the government. But I guess back to talking about all of this stuff like that, they're also like a very capable army, more or less.
yeah,
So so regardless where you want to land, like you switch their mind from I'm protecting a entity, business entity, and that's my job to I'm protecting my homeland. Good luck
yeah,
taking a toe. They will wreck you.
yeah, yeah. It's yeah, we kind of got the geographic lottery for the most part. You know, like I think I think if shit ever popped off with Canada, most of the Canada that's willing to fight would kind of team up with us because like the shitty part of Canada wouldn't fight anyways. And yeah, if you were to invade Mexico, it would not be a cakewalk. It would
Oh
not be a cakewalk.
no, it dang sure wouldn't.
There's some tough country all over that. You know, they got mountains, they got jungle, they got I mean it's yeah, there it would not be a cakewalk.
No, I agree. I completely agree.
Um all right, so then Mongolia was last place, and this sounds like the most interesting place you went to. You rode reindeer. You got to wrestle with the steppe people.
Yep, I did. I did all that.
That's that's kind of a badge of honor. Like those are some of the most manly men on earth. That is like the Mongolian horseman is like for thousands of years have been. I mean that's the descendants of Genghis Khan.
that's exactly right. Yeah, those people that live over there, for example, um, a Mongolian halter, like what we would use as a rope halter,
Hmm.
uh, those come with a what's it? I'm trying to think of what you call like the bit is integrated into the bottom of the halter.
Hmm.
And the reason why that they have that, it's just like a snaffle bit, very easy, simple bit. That snaffle bit, it it's bent on the bottom to fit around a horse's cheekbone.
Hmm.
The like if you think about a rope halter, the part that goes around the cheek of the horse is a bit on every
Okay.
that they use. And that is thousands of years old lineage coming down, and they still use it. And every horse gets haltered in a halter like that. And the reason why is because when Genghis Khan was in power, he uh, required all men to be ready for war within 3 to 5 minutes, somewhere in there.
Hmm.
And so they came up with this idea, well, why not just integrate the bit into the halter? And so all you have to do is loosen that knot on that horse, let it down, put the bit in its mouth, and retie it. And then you take your lead rope and tie it around to the other side, and bang, you have a bridle setup.
Huh.
And they're all just like a snaffle setup, and that's that's how the entire country lives. I mean, we're talking. I don't even know when Genghis Khan was conquering the earth. 1,000 years ago.
Something
It
a long time ago.
was a long time ago, but this was a law that he created, and the entire country still kind of lives by it, basically.
That's
So
wild. Well, all right. So how did you get over there? What was the process that landed you in Mongolia learning this 1,000-year-old tradition?
I went over there. My original plan was to buy a couple horses. Horses are cheap in Mongolia. There's no private land. There's no fences. You can go wherever the hell you want. So you could take off, and that was my plan. Uh, and I asked the guy, is um, I asked him about what he would suggest, because he was an American that had been in Mongolia a bunch. And so I said, where would you start? Where would you finish? All this stuff. And he this he got back to me and he said, it's cool you're coming over to Mongolia. If you would like to, I'd like your help taking veterinary supplies up to these people that they're the last people on earth that ride reindeer as their main source of transportation.
Hmm.
Transport. So uh, he kind of switched my mind. I was originally planning on taking some horses and just riding out, but he talked me into that, and it was a great idea. I'm glad I did it. Glad I did it. But they took us up to. It was me and my friend Eric. He was the guy who set the whole thing up, and we jumped in these vans and drove like 2-3 days on a 2-track road up to where it ended, and then we jumped on horses
Are you carrying your fuel with you?
for the vehicles.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they definitely had like big fuel cans with, and then also they knew where the fuel stops were, because this
Okay.
is not a, it's a nomadic culture, but there are some like tiny establishments. So
Mm.
some of them might have had fuel, but it was few and far between. Um, so we drove for 2 days roughly to the end of the 2-track road, and then met up with a family that had horses that their brother had married into this reindeer tribe. He had married basically the, what do you call it? Like the princess of
Okay.
the reindeer tribe. So we jumped on with these boys, packed a bunch of pack horses. They were wild horses that had never been handled before, as far as I know. So we had to like trip them down and and put the packs on them. So we rode up into the mountains. Uh, there's probably 10 of us, or 10 horses at least. And we camped and we rode and we rode and we rode and we didn't know where the Mongolian reindeer riders were at. Their tribe is called the Tsaden people.
Mm-hmm.
T-A-T-A-N, Tsaden. And we finally found them, and we lived with them for a while. They live in teepees, like as rudimentary as you can imagine. Like they don't have cell phones. They don't nothing. They don't. They just live.
Yeah. Well, I heard you on Tuffy saying, they had meat hanging up outside the teepees. Like, what kind of meat are they eating? Are they eating their reindeer, or what are they? Are they herding sheep, or?
So the meat that was hanging out, I think that the pictures are of, and the day I arrived was goat meat. I think
Okay.
bought, they had bought a goat or two, um, just to get them through the summer. So this was a weird thing too in Mongolia, that they had summer meat and winter meat, and they believed that each type of meat gave them warmth at different times.
Huh.
So, so like horse meat was a winter meat, and beef was a winter meat. Uh, Sheep, goats, things like that, smaller animals, were summer meat, and they would eat those during the summer if they had to.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So we ate a fair amount of like horse stew, porridge, whatever you call it, um, and and reindeer also. Um, but that was basically anything that wasn't like a big growing animal during the summer. They didn't eat because they understood that growing during the summer when there was grass was not worth like putting those animals through the slaughter process, because they they would rather live off dairy and what they could forage.
And save the big animals for the colder weather where they'd keep better.
Right. So
Yeah.
come wintertime, they would eat horse, they would eat beef, in those colder months.
See, that makes a little more sense now, because in the U.S. early days, it was kind of reversed, where like beef was more of a seasonal thing, and it was sold fresh, where a lot of hogs were slaughtered in the winter months because they were easier to smoke and preserve, and so they did a lot of the hog slaughter in the winter months before refrigeration, and cattle were just like beef has always been outside of jerky's been pretty hard to preserve, um, and and so it was more of just a fresh cut of meat, and it wasn't till the refrigerated train car that that you got you know chilled beef going across the country.
Yeah, I think that's right. Those so
I can't hear you. Um, try exiting out. Um, we'll we'll call that good. Before you do that, we'll call that good for my main main episode. And if you want to hear more about the Mongolia story, you can sign up at patreon.com/burningdaylight. But we'll we'll end it for now, and I'll have you exit out and come back in. In the meantime, I'm gonna go take a leak. And thanks everybody for tuning in. Go buy his book. I've got it pulled up on Amazon. It's called The Lost Cowboy, and I've got it coming. I don't have it with me yet, but I'm looking forward to reading it. And go follow him on Facebook. It's The Lost Cowboy. There's a page there, and go read it. Looks like it's gonna be an awesome one. I enjoyed the hell out of this conversation, so thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back hopefully on the flip side to hear a little bit more about Mongolia. Now, move your ass. We're burning daylight.
Riding that lonesome circle once again. Out where there's no one to call a friend. The grass is short and them cows gone dry. Windmills broke, who the hell knows why. So what's a man to do when your own paycheck won't get you through? When you got way too much to lose? Oh no, I got them rancher blues. Prolapse, crooked calf, and 2 feet showing. No rain, no snow, so hard telling, not knowing. Bucking sorrow, bronc, bust up the leg of the hired man. Broken mouth cows are headed for the can. And if you work for a living, why do you kill yourself working? These unsuspected turns, suspicion sticking round lurking. Been fighting flies, pushing up the drag. Lump jaws, cancer eyes, sunburned bags. So what's a man to do when your own paycheck won't get you through? When you got way too much to lose? sire has left these bum calves around. Third trimester loss, grazing in the pines. Living these townships range and section lines.